Morning all. We start with questions on our route out of lockdown as we enter the next stage of the vaccine rollout. The Vaccines Minister joining us shortly, but first let's take a look at the morning's main developments. Sky News has learned that some government scientists are keen to keep that 1 metre plus social distancing measures in place for the foreseeable future. Boris Johnson, well, he says he wants the easing of England's lockdown restrictions to be cautious but irreversible. And the Institute for Fiscal Studies has made fresh calls this morning to extend the furlough scheme and also to extend the £20 universal credit uplift. Well, one area hit particularly hard by the pandemic is Oldham, a town already one of the most deprived in England. Our People and Politics correspondent Nick Martin went there to see how families are coping.
This is Mackenzie, he's just turned 13. This is Corby, he's 4. And this is Freddie, and he's 3.
For Jessica Degnan, heating the house and feeding her kids during lockdown is expensive. She relies more and more on the local food bank for help.
I've got your food there. How are you?
I've been on a bad week this week. But I think that was me as well, because I've not been sleeping and things just going on in my mind.
The pandemic and poverty are proving a toxic mix. 1 in 3 children in Oldham are already living in poverty, more than anywhere else in the UK. Towns like Oldham struggled long before the pandemic arrived. When industry fell away, it became one of the most deprived towns in England. People's health declined, jobs became scarce. But what's become clear is a year into this crisis, for an awful lot of people, those issues have got much, much worse. 100,000 people live here. 5,000 of them live in overcrowded conditions, living their lockdown out of sight.
In this house there's 4 of my brothers, including me, 2 of my sisters, and then my sister-in-law, and then my niece, and then my mum and dad.
It's a tiny house for so many. The children haven't been to school since March, and homeschooling just isn't happening.
All we do is stay home locked up. Proper hard. They're not learning much because at home it's not the right environment for it.
Do you think people realise how hard it is for families like yours?
No one realises.
The government says it's given councils £3.2 billion to tackle the effects of COVID in communities.
I think what's happened is COVID-19 has actually exposed the weakness in our system. The Conservative government has given money. That is welcome. There's no doubt about that. But they're not giving us enough money.
Lovely to see you, and I'll see you next week. Yeah, have a good week.
On the other side of town, Jessica and her 3 boys are just trying to get through this pandemic. But it's hard.
It's just not good, you know, being on your own. Like, Kim's always at the other side of the phone, but like, if I didn't have her, then I probably would have lost it by now.
Mom, come on.
Do you feel like you're on your own sometimes?
Yeah. This week, I've never felt so lonely in my life.
In a few weeks' time, the Chancellor will reveal the government's plans to recover from COVID. For a lot of families, an end to this can't come soon enough. Nick Martin, Sky News, Oldham.
Joining us once again on the programme, the Minister responsible for the vaccines rollout, Nadhim Zahawi. Mr Zahawi, good to see you this morning, and plenty, of course, to discuss about the ongoing rollout. But look, let's not let the Health Secretary be the only person that gets congratulated on this programme. We hit that 15 million target. As the Minister responsible, you've clearly played a big part in that, so well done.
Thank you very much, Neil, and it's an incredible team that has delivered that target, not least Brigadier Phil Prosser and 101 Logistics Brigade, but of course the NHS, the GPs, the nurses, the pharmacists, the volunteers, the army of vaccinators, and of course the volunteers marshalling people, making sure those 4 cohorts, those most vulnerable people, were offered the vaccine and were able to get through vaccine sites in as smooth a way as possible. So I stand on the shoulders of heroes, and I feel in many ways like a bit of an imposter, but we focus on making sure now we deliver the next target which is we offer the vaccine to all 5 to 9 cohorts. So that's in total, we'll be at 32 million people with the first dose. And of course, the second dose. This week is the first week, Neil, where we've been able to, with the supply stabilizing, send out the schedules over the next 3 weeks for people to begin, of course, to deliver for cohort 5 and 6, but also to book in the second doses, which will begin in hospital hubs in the final week of February, and then in primary care and GPs from the 1st of March onwards.
Can we then, Minister, perhaps talk just a little about a subject that I know is concerning you, vaccine hesitancy. An interesting piece of information that had not crossed my radar, I have to admit, that some people within the black and minority ethnic, Asian and minority ethnic communities are saying that they are concerned about taking the vaccine because they're concerned that it may affect fertility. They're concerned that it may affect them if they are pregnant. Can you speak directly to that and provide some reassurances?
Absolutely. There is a tsunami of disinformation, misinformation, which we have a unit across government that is dealing with the technology platforms to take down some of this fake news in terms of effects on fertility. It does not. In terms of pregnancy, you can have your vaccine, of course, once you've had a discussion with your clinician to make sure that your own physiology allows you to do that. It's one of the issues that Simon Stevens, the chief executive of the NHS, addressed last night, which is this sort of the pandemic itself and then a pandemic of misinformation, or as I just referred to it, a tsunami of misinformation on social platforms. And it's very important that we continue to deliver accurate information in people's own languages, but of course in their communities. We're translating everything into 20 languages, from Arabic to Farsi to Hindu to Polish, across the board. We have to reach those hard to reach groups, because although, and you've heard me say this before, vaccine positivity in the UK, so people, adults saying they will take the vaccine, is at 89% of the adult population. The 11% that are vaccine hesitant or have questions skew heavily towards some of the ethnic communities, the Black and Afro-Caribbean communities, the Indian and Pakistani and Bangladeshi communities. And we are working with those community leaders. We've put £25 million to work through local government. And of course, most importantly, I published the uptake strategy on Saturday, sharing data with local government, the NHS and local government working hand in hand to make sure we reach those groups with the information and, of course, the access. One of the things we've found, Neil, is actually a lot of people want easier access to be able to go and get vaccinated. So we are assessing lots of pop-up sites. At least 200 new faith group sites have come forward, and we're looking at those as well. We're already vaccinating in the Hikmah Centre in Batley that the PM visited, and of course the Abbas Mosque in Birmingham and cathedrals around the country. It's about access that I think will be our focus on that, and data sharing will hopefully get us to the high levels of acceptance from Black and ethnic minority communities.
Those faith centres being used for vaccination, I'm sure, will advance the campaign against disinformation. But again, a suggestion, a very specific suggestion coming from within the Muslim community, is that there are perhaps significant numbers of people not taking the first dose of the vaccine because their second dose would fall in Ramadan. Now, I don't know enough about Islam to say whether or not this is something that would be prescribed by Islam, but clearly there are concerns. Again, speak very specifically to this community, if you can, Minister.
Yeah, very much so, Neil. So, of course, we make already plans for Ramadan when people are fasting, and make sure that, as we do with other communities, look into their festivals. Purim is almost upon us for the Jewish community. And of course, Ramadan is something that we've got to make sure that the system adjusts to be able to deal with that. But faith leaders in the Muslim community have come out very clearly, whether it's the East London Mosque or the Abbas Mosque in Birmingham, and said that actually you have to come forward and take your vaccine. It protects you. We know that BAME communities are disproportionately impacted by this virus. So come forward and take the first dose, and we'll make sure that we will accommodate any issues around Ramadan or any other religious festival to make sure that you can get your second dose safely and in the correct way.
Good to hear, Minister. I wonder if we can talk about some of the measures that were introduced pretty much first in a response to COVID-19, social distancing and mask wearing, a suggestion picked up by our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, you know, that the scientists advising the government are wanting to see those measures kept in for the foreseeable future. Are you minded to see that happen? I mean, I suppose the point is that, you know, people have been hearing ministers talking about a return to normality. For many people, social distancing, not being able to hug your friends, wearing a face mask, that doesn't fall within plenty of people's definition of normal.
You're absolutely right. We are all pro-social animals. You know, it's in our DNA that we want to socially interact. We want to hug our children, our grandchildren, our friends. I would say this: we have to be data-driven rather than just date-driven. You know, we have to follow the evidence from SAGE, from the scientists, to make sure that, you know, if we are able to control this virus better. Obviously, our main, you know, our way out of this pandemic is our vaccination program, which we are making sure that we deliver as quickly as possible, protecting the most vulnerable and then moving to the whole of the adult population. You know, we want to be able to, by September, have offered the vaccine to the whole of the adult population. But with that level of vaccination, which hopefully we'll see the data on you know, infection rates coming down, transmission, there's some good data from Oxford, but that has to be peer reviewed, and we wait for our own data from the Public Health England surveys that are being conducted. But with that, surge testing, tracing and isolation, and any other measures, whether it's mask wearing or social distancing, I think we have to be driven by the data rather than just dates. That's my message to your viewers is, you know, if we look at the evidence and share that evidence, people are you know, able then to make those decisions for themselves. And I think that's the right way to do that. The Prime Minister will be saying more on this on the 22nd of February in terms of the roadmap back to reopening schools, hopefully on the 8th of March, and then gradually reopening our economy. But it has to be data-driven, evidence-driven, rather than just, you know, relying on you know, what we all want to see, because we're all anxious to want to get our lives back and our economy back on its feet as quickly as possible.
Yeah, and again, this kind of all takes us back to the Prime Minister repeating yesterday something that he said before. Look, case numbers are going to be incredibly important in determining which measures are relaxed and so on. I suppose the question there is, look, we are testing more than we ever have done, which is undeniably going to register more cases just because of that. I mean, if we look back to when case numbers were low last summer, July the 4th, when the pubs reopened, it was 624 cases that we were registering, with far fewer tests going on than there are now. So I'm just wondering, what kind of level do we need to bring it down to before we start talking about what we're going to be hearing, you know, next Monday?
Well, I think you're right to look at whether it's case numbers, and you're absolutely right to say that we are now both in terms of capacity at about 800,000 PCR capacity tests a day, and of course the level of testing. You know, we're almost touching that on average a week, about 600,000 to 700,000 tests a day per week, as well as of course many more lateral flow tests through local government, through businesses, as well as people in the NHS and in the healthcare system having those twice a week tests to make sure that we remain on top of the virus. But again, the Prime Minister's right to say that where we are today, in terms of number of people in hospital, in terms of case numbers per day, it's still far too high, and we want to make sure we bring that right down. But I wouldn't want to speculate on this until we see more data, and of course, ask those who are expert, the scientists, the SAGE, and of course the Chief Medical Officer, to look at this and to advise us accordingly, and be data-driven we all want the same thing, Neil. We want to make sure we reopen the economy as quickly as possible, but of course, make sure that it is sustainable. That's the important thing. Hence why we've got such a strong vaccination deployment campaign, but also the Prime Minister's already asked us to think about not just this vaccination deployment, but what will happen if we need a booster in the autumn, which we're planning for, and of course, then an annual vaccination program for future years if we have to deliver that, if the virus has mutated to a level where we need vaccine variants and, of course, annual vaccination programs. All of that will be discussed in the mix. And, of course, the PM will set out the roadmap on the 22nd of February based on the evidence.
Just to interrupt, sorry to interrupt, Minister, but just one thing that the Prime Minister did mention yesterday, lateral flow tests to essentially enjoy a night out. Now, there are a couple of problems with that, obviously. Case numbers are far too high for mass use of lateral flow. Also, are we really going to be testing people for access when there are so many false positives?
Well, so I think...
Sorry, false negatives, I should say.
Yes, and I got your point. Absolutely right. So I think what the Prime Minister actually said is it will be a combination of the national vaccination programme becoming really successful, reaching that 89% of the adult population, where currently, according to all the surveys, including the Office for National Statistics survey, that 85% of the adults say they will take the vaccine. The latest stats I saw, I think from Ipsos Mori, said 89% said they will take the vaccine. So what he was talking about is a world where we have the adult population vaccinated to those high levels, and then rapid testing technology where you can get a quick test done and then be able to use that as a way of reopening, whether it be theatres or the rest of the economy.
Got to let you go, Minister. As always, good to have you on the programme. Thanks again.
Thank you very much.
Time, as always, to bring in our political correspondent this morning, Kate McCann, back in the studio. Lots, I think, actually, from the Minister there. What left out to you?
I think, really, the overall approach is what strikes me. It's that word sustainable. That's what Nadhim Zahawi spoke to you about there. When he was talking through the criteria for unlocking, it's all about doing this slowly, making sure there's evidence. And the reason behind that is because the government is so determined that this is the last lockdown. There doesn't need to be any strict measure like this again in place. Now, that's a pretty big thing to say. And, of course, the Prime Minister last night couldn't go as far as to guarantee there'd never be another lockdown. But that's the aim. That's what they're all working towards. And you can really hear that behind the scenes of what Nadhim Zahawi is talking about there, because everything he's saying to you is very cautious. There's all that kind of caveated information in there about testing, but also vaccination. Nothing is straightforward anymore. And previously, I think things had maybe been a little bit black and white. What we're seeing now is a much more complex picture. And crucially, on what you were asking him about vaccine hesitancy, that's going to become a bigger issue because of what he said at the end there, that they're relying on vaccination to be able to unlock society. So really cracking that issue, getting clear information out to the right communities quickly is going to be one of the most important jobs of ministers in the next couple of weeks.
Certainly will. Kate, many thanks indeed. But as we were discussing with the Minister and indeed with just discussing with Kate, there are still concerns about uptake of the vaccine amongst some communities. The head of NHS England has warned of a pandemic of disinformation, did say progress is being made in Black and South Asian communities. Ashna Huranag spoke to two shoppers in East London, worried about having the vaccine.
I'm planning for a family in future, and the rumour saying that it can affect your fertility. So that's the main factor.
I heard you feel restless after taking this vaccine.
If someone told you that wasn't true, it's okay to take it, would that change your mind?
Yeah, if doctor said, yeah.
Now, two raids, two illegal parties. One, a nightclub, complete with a VIP room and 115 ravers. The other, a makeshift pub called the COVID Arms. Police have released video of the two big busts in Birmingham, where revellers tried to escape justice by running across the rooftops. Milena Veselinovic has the detail.
The front line of the crackdown on COVID rule breakers. Police in Birmingham raid an illegal nightclub in the heart of the city, complete with its own VIP area. 150 people were inside and some revellers pelted officers with bottles before trying to escape by climbing the roof.
They're making off over the roofs.
70 people were fined £200 and police say the DJ could face a £10,000 penalty for breaking lockdown rules. 8 miles down the road in Dudley Port, detectives were tipped off about a COVID Arms, a car garage converted into a makeshift pub.
Do you mind turning that off for us, please? If I put it bluntly, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13.
A dozen drinkers were allowed to leave. The owner was fined £1,000. The police crackdown on mass gatherings has been stepped up across the country during the pandemic. Back in August, officers dispersed this illegal rave in Birmingham, where 2 marquees had been set up. And just 10 days ago, police broke up a party attended by more than 150 students on campus in Sheffield.
Back in. Back in. Everybody back in. Everybody in. Back in.
And as hopes grow for an easing of restrictions soon, authorities are keen to emphasise that sticking to the rules is more important than ever. Milena Veselinovic, Sky News.
Still to come on the programme, is now the time for a rethink on travel corridors, or perhaps sea lanes? I'll be speaking to the head of Brittany Ferries at 25 to 8. 8:15, we'll be speaking to the Mayor of London for his thoughts about how the capital should come out of lockdown. And at 8:45, I'll be speaking to the composer and a lyricist behind a new musical drama putting the Windrush scandal on stage. Some of the day's other news now. And military personnel who were stripped of their medals because of their sexual orientation are to have them restored. The ban on LGBT+ people serving in the armed forces was lifted in the year 2000. The Veterans Minister, Johnny Mercer, says it's a chance to right a historic wrong.
Where we have had discriminatory policies like this, I apologise. I apologise for those experiences. And I hope today's announcement goes some way. Clearly, it will never go all the way, but some way to redress some of the pain that has been caused over the years by that policy of discriminating against the LGBT+ community.
2 disused army barracks currently being used to accommodate asylum seekers face inspection today after concerns about conditions. The Home Secretary, Priti Patel, has defended the use of Penally Camp in Pembrokeshire and Napier Barracks in Kent to house migrants, saying the accommodation is suitable. Campaigners say that they are not fit for purpose. Here's something to send some shivers down your spine. After days of sub-zero temperatures in Amsterdam, people have been skating on the city's canals, the first time it's been possible since 2018. One brave skater startled onlookers by gliding down the main canal in just his boxers. Rather you than me, mate. The UK tabloids have dubbed it the royal soap opera. This is the news that Harry and Meghan have agreed to an intimate interview with Oprah Winfrey. But just how far will they go on spilling the beans about the royal family? Our US correspondent Greg Milam reports.
There are benefits to living in the celebrity enclave of Montecito, walls to keep out the prying eyes, and the world's most famous interviewer as a neighbour. Oprah Winfrey, once a wedding guest, now the host of The Interview. And in America, that's big news. So what can we expect?
In the United States, Oprah Winfrey is royalty. Where she really excels at is getting emotional and sort of connecting on an emotional level with some of her subjects. And I think that's where you'll probably see some moments of perhaps tears. I don't think she's there to grill the Duke and Duchess, and I don't think that was why they agreed to do this interview.
Famously, of course, they did once seem to want out of the limelight.
For those who question how you can be high profile on one hand and expect the total privacy of living somewhere like this on the other, well, welcome to Hollywood. That is what A-listers here have come to expect and what they generally get.
This family, though, has something none of them have.
Meghan and Harry are not just another celebrity couple here. The royal thing over here is a totally different level, has a totally different cachet, and they have access as royals to anyone they want here.
So will the locals be watching that interview?
No, I watched a lot of The Crown in quarantine, so I do feel like I'm somewhat vested in the royal family at this point, but no, I don't think it'll be appointment television for me.
I'm not one of those royal chasers. I know people who are, living and breathing by that kind of stuff. But now they're in the community and they seem like lovely human beings.
I have better things to worry about than that. Look at that as a Sussex.
But for millions, it will be must-see TV. Greg Milam, Sky News, Montecito in California.
Time to check in, see how the weather is looking this Tuesday. Naz is standing by, and I'm told, Naz, mild and wet.
Yes, mild and wet. Or, wait, you can combine that to be wild. Anyway, it is looking mild and wet. Let's take a look at the details.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Good morning. Mild Atlantic air is going to cause temperatures to rise this week up into the mid to high teens for some southern areas into the weekend. But with it, it is going to be unsettled as well. In fact, this morning, there are spells of rain across parts of northeast England, just clearing from the east of Wales, the Midlands and central southern England. Also rain just about clearing from the northeast of Scotland, perhaps still lingering for a time this morning across Shetland and Orkney. Blustery showers across northwest Scotland and showers over western parts of Ireland. Otherwise, it's a mainly dry and bright and mild start this morning. That rain will be slowly edging its way eastwards over central, southern and eastern parts of England, taking some time to clear from the southeast of England this afternoon, so staying quite dull and wet there this afternoon. But for a time from the west, it will be brighter, but those showers over Western Ireland will be spreading eastwards with heavy downpours and later towards Wales and England. So it will be wet at times across these areas with those heavy showers. Then after that, Ireland and Northern Ireland will become drier. I think the driest and brightest conditions today will be across Scotland, except for the northwest, where it will be blustery, wet and with showers.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Wild. Still to come on Sky News Breakfast, I'll be hearing from the Immigration Service Union for their views on quarantine and indeed the safest way to bring back international travel in the future.
The nature of warfare is changing. An invisible enemy is on the rise, in a grey zone between war and peace. It's a global battlefield that thrives on deniability. The weapons of choice include disinformation, intimidation, and cyber attacks. Everyone's a target. Into the grey zone from Sky News. Warfare is changing, and now we're all on the front line. Listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Only about half a mile from the Turkish coast, and it's evident that is the boat seriously overcrowded. This is one of the most severe viruses in the world. I'm Alex Crawford and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul.
This is going to be the biggest party Tripoli has ever seen.
That's it got us then. There's a lot of action going on, a lot of still. We aim to be the best and the most trusted place in news.
Clearly not had very much to eat at all, a lot of them extremely thin and very frail. Her arms, look at her arms. I can put my entire hand round.
This is the cocktail of drugs which the doctors at this hospital have been giving their coronavirus patients. Made for people who want clarity in an uncertain world.
Once it takes a hold, it's very, very difficult for these firefighters to get a grip of it and get on top of it and put it out. The world's largest falls now down to a trickle in places.
I can't imagine how much plastic is lying at the bottom of this huge lake. Whoa!
Getting up close and personal with a rhino.
This is what makes the job so fantastic.
Welcome back. As per usual, let's take a look at the latest data we have for coronavirus here in the UK. There have been 9,765 new confirmed positive cases in the last 24 hours. That's the first time that figure has been below 10,000 since the start of October. A further 230 people have died within 28 days of testing positive for COVID-19, bringing the UK total to 117,396. So far, though, 15.3 million first doses of a vaccine have been administered. The Vaccines Minister, Nadhim Zahawi, has said he'll be watching data, not dates, when it comes to start unlocking COVID restrictions across England. Speaking to the programme earlier, he said he wanted to see the evidence that it's safe to start unlocking and meeting friends and relatives again, not to go by a set timescale.
It's in our DNA that we want to socially interact. We want to hug our children, our grandchildren, our friends. I would say this: we have to be data-driven rather than just date-driven. You know, we have to follow the evidence from SAGE, from the scientists, to make sure that, you know, if we are able to control this virus better. Obviously, our main our way out of this pandemic is our vaccination program, which we are making sure that we deliver as quickly as possible, protecting the most vulnerable and then moving to the whole of the adult population. You know, we want to be able to, by September, have offered the vaccine to the whole of the adult population.
Well, in common with many countries, the UK's travel industry is at a near standstill. The new quarantine rules are biting for people entering the country, and you have to be legally permitted to travel abroad. And that means, of course, no holidays. So when might travel corridors return? Joining us now is Lucy Morton, professional officer for the Immigration Service Union. Lucy, great to have you on the programme this morning. Just give us an idea what your members are telling us, that which they have seen over the weekend and indeed the past couple of days. Understand there was a huge pressure on our borders at the weekend, of course, when people were trying to get in before the new quarantine restrictions were applied.
Yeah, we did see a lot of travel over the weekend. Understandably, whenever you announce a cut-off date like this, people will travel in advance of it. That's quite understandable. Yesterday was quite quiet. Only a few hundred arrived. As far as we know, they all pre-booked. They were all handed over to quarantine management services. They all moved on. And of course, viewers will have seen the media coverage, talking to them in their hotels and things yesterday. They were expressing concerns, and rightly so, that they were mixing. So they travelled on the aircraft without being segregated. They mixed in the airport all the way through that process. And they were only sort of separated off after they'd passed through the border checks.
What then is the role of the immigration officials standing at that particular border check? To what extent are they being asked to, verify negative COVID tests? To what extent are they being asked to check that passengers haven't travelled through red list countries, in the relatively recent past?
They check, they ask the questions. Their role is to ensure that the individual qualifies for entry into the UK. But actually, at the moment, that's a very minor part of what the Border Force staff are doing. So they check that the passenger locator form's been completed, that the 2 test packages have been booked and paid for. If they've been in a red list country and they've declared it, of course, that they've booked the quarantine hotel so that they can be handed over to the management services for that. They'll ask, have you been in any of these countries in the last 10 days? As best we can, if people lie to us, it might be that they can check that by looking at the passport. There might be entry stamps. It does make the interaction a bit slower. And of course, that does inevitably, particularly at Heathrow, lead to queues.
Do we have any idea? Obviously, it's very early days in terms of this particular part of the government's response at the borders, but do we have any idea how many people are trying to be perhaps a little bit fly to get through the border?
No, it's inherently unknowable, actually. We can't know how many people evade our checks in one way or another. But at the moment, we're less than 24 hours in, but at the moment it appears that people are complying, or if they are not complying, we haven't caught them yet.
Do you think that immigration officers are completely 100% in command of what it is that they are supposed to be doing, what they're being tasked to do by the government in all of this? This is not a criticism of your members, perhaps just a suggestion that the information that was coming from central government might not have been 100% helpful.
The things that the staff are being asked to check, they can check what is there at face value. But what we don't have is any broader capacity to check that the information that we're being given is true. So you can download a negative COVID certificate off the internet. You don't even have to go on the dark web to do it. You can get it off of Google. There's no international standards. So we have to take that at face value. They've got a bit of paper that's been typed up on a computer that says there's a negative test. We can't go any further than that. There is no way to do that. We can't verify an address. People can tell us that they're coming to stay at 123 Puddle Lane, but we can't verify that that exists. And once they leave the border control area, we don't have any further involvement in checking that they go to where they're supposed to be going or that they stay there and don't come out. Obviously, if they go to a hotel, that is a little bit more controlled. But again, not Border Force's responsibility. That rests with the public health authorities.
Lucy Morton from the Immigration Service Union. Great to see you this morning. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you very much.
So, what news then for the travel industry per se as the vaccinations programme gathers pace? Christophe Mathieu, the Chief Executive of Brittany Ferries, joins us on the programme. Christophe, great to have you on this morning. Thanks for joining us. Your organisation, Brittany Ferries, is proposing a vaccination-led travel corridor. Can you explain how this would work for me?
Well, the idea is that given that vaccination rate is progressing fastly in the UK, in France, in Spain, what we hope for is that there will be forward planning by governments to allow in those areas where vaccination are quite high, infection rate decrease. And we're not talking for now, of course, we're talking forward planning for the spring, late spring, but all these things in planning. And the idea is that really there are areas where it should be safe this summer to travel. And what's very important, we believe, is that everybody is desperate, absolutely desperate to travel and to go back to some kind of normality. And we saw last summer how people were keen to travel. And this time around, we just want to be a little bit ahead and warn and try to also attract attention from the governments to take a bit of planning going forward. We're not saying now, we're fully aware that now the situation is not right, but give a couple of months with vaccination and all of that, we should plan ahead and we should all be allowed to have a summer this summer.
Look, you're speaking to someone who enjoys nothing more than relaxing on the beaches of France with a nice bottle of white wine by his side. At the same time, you're talking about perhaps this beginning, a couple of months' time. Now, we're speaking to the Vaccines Minister, Nadhim Zahawi, just a few minutes ago. It will be September, they're talking about, for the adult population in the UK to have been offered a vaccine. It seems to me that it might not be this side of the summer, that it could be, what kind of level, I suppose I'm asking, what kind of level of vaccination do you think we need to get to as a country before we can do this type of thing?
I think at the end of the day, it's all about the risk population being really covered, because I think we also need to take a view. I'm not getting into health issues here, but at the end of the day, providing the people at risk have been vaccinated, both in France, Spain, the UK, I think it comes to a point where, of course, with the social distanciation, that's not a question. I think there'll be a moment where it's better overall that people have a summer like you, like all of us, because it's fundamentally important after such a period to have that time where we can all take a deep breath and enjoy life again, rather than. So my guess is, yeah, of course, not everybody may be vaccinated by the summer, but providing there is something like 50, 60% of the population, and mainly the population at risk, have been vaccinated, I see no reason why, if we are being careful, we can't do it. And there are also maybe type of transportation and particular areas, and of course I would say that are more adequate in moments like that, because I think it's not quite the moment to go for a city break, but it's more the moment to go in a rural area. It's more the moment maybe to take a ferry crossing, because you have plenty of space on a ferry rather than other ways of traveling. I suppose, as Brittany says, we feel we have something to offer, maybe a bit more than others this summer.
Yeah, well, we may well get a strong indication of if this is possible next Monday, when the government publishes the roadmap out of all of this. Christophe Mathieu, CEO, Brittany Ferries, good to have you on the show this morning. Thanks.
Thank you.
Still to come on the programme this morning, calls for school workers and the police to be prioritised in the next phase of the vaccine rollout. We'll be discussing that next.
For the early risers.
As we examine the story beyond the headline.
For the knowledge seekers.
Welcome to Divided States.
For the straight talkers, the curious, and the ones who want to be entertained.
Backstage, Sky News' entertainment podcast.
For wherever you are.
Welcome to Sophie Ridge on Sunday podcast.
For the ones who want to know more.
Welcome to the All Out Politics podcast.
For the listeners.
From Sky News Storycast.
Sky News Podcasts. Listen and subscribe for free.
Welcome back. With the success of the vaccine rollout, should the government now consider vaccinating essential workers, such as the police or teachers, both of whom deal face-to-face with people, young and old, every day at work? Well, joining us now, the Vice-Chairman of West Yorkshire Police Federation, Sergeant Craig Grandison, and the Chief Executive of the Dean Trust, which runs 10 schools in the Northwest, Taryn Kapoor. Gents, great to have you both on this morning. Craig, I'll come to you first. As the policeman in all of this, always does you well to start with the copper, I find. Make the case, if you can. I know friends who are working on the thin blue line at the moment would be very, very happy to receive a vaccine right now. So make the case on his behalf.
Yeah, of course, my colleagues up and down the country would be very, very happy to receive the vaccine at this point. I think it's an ill-judged decision of the government not to roll that out at this point. We are the police. There's a number of occupations within this country which you physically cannot do socially distanced. Medical services are one, the ambulance service, social care, there are others. They've all been vaccinated. Rolling on from that, you've got the likes of the police service, the prison service, the fire service, where we have to physically get close and personal to people. We have to lay hands on. For me, this isn't just about vaccinating police officers so they're safe. It's also about vaccinating us so that we can keep other members of the community safe. We see vulnerable people day in, day out. We go from job to job to job. If we've got an asymptomatic police officer or a police officer that's just contracted the virus, then there's every chance that we can pass that on to an innocent member of the public doing our job.
Craig, just a quick follow-up on that. I mean, the two policemen that I know very well, both of them have been spat at by people who were COVID-19. That's just anecdote, of course. Is that something that you've heard from your members?
Yes, obviously we record oral assaults on police, and during the period of the COVID pandemic, we have been specifically looking at incidents of that nature. We have many police officers that are spat at in the course of their duties. We've had our annual survey that's come out only recently that showed that COVID was being weaponised by some of our less desirable customers who were constantly spitting at us, getting into our faces, using it as a threat. And over a third of police officers that have been on the front line during the pandemic have experienced that.
Taryn Kapoor, of course, the Dean Trust, as we mentioned, running 10 schools, 6 secondary, 4 primary. So there's both ends of the spectrum to deal with there. Make the case for teachers being prioritised as a matter of priority. Certainly, the science has veered left and right when it comes to whether or not schools are vectors for the virus. It appears that they are, but perhaps it follows infection in the community rather than leads to infection in the community.
Yeah, good morning. I don't think it's just about priority. I think it's about making some decisions which will get the country going again and giving confidence to parents and businesses that the schools are going to remain open. One of the biggest issues we had previously was that we had to keep partially closing schools because staff were affected by the virus. Now, what we have to do at the moment, and the government have asked us to, is do mass testing of pupils and staff each week. If we didn't have to test the staff each week, we'd have more resource to be able to do other things. And we wouldn't have to worry about the staff contracting the virus. And the confidence levels amongst our school staff would be sky high because we're striving for normality. And to be honest, what we've found is the country is, the backbone of the country is the education system, because without that, everything seems to have ground to a halt. I can't argue with what the police officer said because they're absolutely right. My son-in-law's a police officer, I absolutely get it. But it's about decision-making, which is looking at the bigger picture. And the final thing I would say on that is the government can't get it wrong again in terms of opening us up and then closing us down. Now, there may be a case for primary school staff to have it first because if the primary child can go to school, the parent can go to work. Slightly different in secondary.
Well, Taryn, just on that, I mean, have your teachers been coming to you to express, individual concerns about their safety? Have there been people who didn't want to turn up for work because of concerns for their safety?
Well, we've had some extremely clinically vulnerable staff who haven't been in since last March. And if they're given a vaccine, they will immediately come in. So we've got around 15% of our staff who are in a category, and that affects the education of children and the pressure on other staff. So yes, there's those people. There's others who are genuinely scared of the situation. And I think we can provide a confidence boost if over the next month we can get all staff vaccinated. Now, I understand the pressure of that because there's second vaccinations that people have to have, and the pressure on the number of jabs available will be immense. But it's a government decision, and they have to decide what's the most important thing. And you can't balance the police off with teachers or support staff. They have to do something different and think about it. And the final thing on that would be, we can't really open secondary school until we know what's going to happen with the examinations, because that decision needs to be made next week before a decision on school opening is made the week afterwards.
Craig, just a point from you on kind of how COVID-19, if it has indeed been affecting things, how it has affected staffing within the police force at the moment. We know that numbers, the government is trying to build up numbers again. They're not where they need to be. I mean, have we been seeing some holes in the rotas in terms of policing communities because of COVID-19?
We have in places, yeah. Our sickness has been up and down over the period of the pandemic over the last 12 months or so. I suppose, like everything, what sometimes happens is you get an outbreak. So if you get an outbreak in one particular area of policing, then you may knock out a significant number of a team or of a group of people, the police, that therefore create some holes. But we can generally backfill those from other areas. But it is a problem, and it will continue to be a problem until such times as we've effectively eliminated the risk within the organisation.
Well, we may well hear movement from the government on this in the next few days. You never know. Sergeant Grandison, Taryn Kapoor, thank you both so much for joining us in the programme this morning. Time for us to see how the weather's looking. Here's Naz.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Good morning. Mild Atlantic air will see temperatures rise this week, but as well as that, it's going to be quite unsettled. We're going to continue with the often wet and windy conditions. In fact, this morning there are spells of rain that are actually quite heavy, and there could be some spray on the roads currently across parts of northern England, down towards the Midlands, the east of Wales and down towards some central and southern areas. As well as that, there's rain across the northeast of Scotland, showers over the blustery northwest and also showers over western parts of Ireland. Apart from that, it's a mostly dry, bright but mild start to the day. Now, the rain across England and Wales will be slowly edging its way eastwards this morning, mostly clearing from central and southern areas, but taking its time to clear from parts of the southeast. So I think until around mid-afternoon, it's going to be quite wet there. Then behind that, for a time, it will become a bit dry, maybe even a bit brighter, but there will be showers already across western parts of Ireland, starting to move eastwards with some heavy downpours again and heading over parts of Wales and England this afternoon. Then it will become drier again from the west for a time before further rain into tonight. So it's a conveyor belt of wet weather continuously over the next few days. Scotland, though, doesn't look too bad. The rain from the northeast clearing this afternoon, blustery showers in the northwest, but otherwise mainland Scotland mainly dry and bright.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.